working with nonprofits, municipalities, private landowners, and volunteers on streamside tree plantings and other projects aimed at protecting the water quality in the tributary streams of the Hudson River. And I know she's done some absolutely great work in Rockland County. Beth and I have met in the past and really look forward to hopefully meeting again and doing some more planting. So with that, Beth, take it away. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And I'm gonna make a little mention of some of the work that we've already done in Rockland County in my presentation. I think I need, oh yeah, there we go. I'll share my screen with my presentation. Okay.
Great.
Oh. There we go. Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction, Matt. You have my name and affiliation, but he already gave those. And so I'm going to start with talking a little bit about riparian buffers and why we want to protect them and how we can protect them. And then I'll go into trees for tribs towards the end. But first, I have to talk about who I work for. I work for the Hudson River Estuary Program, helping people to enjoy, protect, revitalize the Hudson River and its valley, and using all of these different lenses of benefits. And I'm not going to go into detail with that, but I just wanted you to see that information. Okay, so let's talk about healthy stream buffers. Why do we want them? They can help reduce stream pollution by reducing the erosion that gets into the stream, filtering runoff before it gets to the stream, or sorry, reducing erosion on the stream and filtering runoff before it gets to the stream, improving nutrient processing within the stream. So that's where the stream itself and all the interactions can work on nitrogen and phosphorus, reducing flooding and damage, recharging groundwater, so slowing that water down, getting it into the ground before it gets to the stream, providing wildlife habitat, improving property value, supporting recreation. So that's recreation both in the water like kayaking and along the water like trails. So sequestering carbon, which is more and more a big conversation that we're having. A recent study done on the Delaware River Basin found that each acre of buffer along stream is worth approximately $10,000 in monetized benefits. So it's not nothing. And some other benefits, these are more on the social side, education. So this is benefits of actually planting those buffers or working in them, maintenance and the like. Education, so it's a chance to get people out and thinking about water. Community engagement, just a fun thing for people to come out and do. There's my picture of that in New Paltz. You can meet some of your MS4 requirements, so both the educational requirement and may also be useful as a way to catch stormwater before it gets off property or onto a stream. To implement local plans. So if you already have local plans calling out needs for stream protection, this is one way to do it. And you can get climate smart community points. And I'll go into that in more detail a little bit later. So let's talk about what makes a healthy stream buffer. So what does a healthy buffer look like? And I like to share this picture on top, partly because there are buffers on both sides of this stream, but the one on the left-hand side is kind of the minimum, and it might not be adequate if the stream starts moving a little bit. We really want to see something more like what's on the right. So we want them to be diverse with native vegetation, many different types of vegetation in case we get another pest. And so, if we lose a few species, we're always going to have some left. Many different sizes of plants. So we want tall plants and short plants, and you kind of see this in that bottom picture. We want it to be wide, which is what I was talking about at the beginning. We want it to be shady, especially for those small streams. We want to make sure that we're getting shade in that stream, help keeps the stream cool, which is great for fish. And messy. And wanting things messy is sort of might confuse people, but they really do. There's a lot going on, and sometimes there's trees that fall in the stream, and sometimes there's things that are leaning a little bit. And as long as that's not threatening anyone or any infrastructure, that's actually good for the stream and good for the fish. They use those spaces. And so a lot of times this is the thing we're fighting when we're working in public, where we're putting in these riparian buffers, because people want them to be manicured, and that's better than nothing, but it's not ideal. And so I said we want them to be wide, and the width that you want, I mean, wider is always better, but the width that you want may be, you may want to think about what your goal is. So if you're thinking about bank stabilization, especially on some of these big streams, you're really not going to get that with that one line of trees that we saw in that last picture. So, and this is from one resource. You can, for every resource you find that talks about what's the ideal width, you're going to get a different answer. This is actually in the model local law for the Department of State. They use these numbers from the resource that's down at the bottom. So you can see there's different sizes. So you can get a little bit, like 16-foot buffer, you might get a little bit of nitrogen and phosphorus processing, but if you go wider, you're going to get a lot more habitat. You want to go really wide for different, depending on which species you're thinking about. Flood mitigation, all these depend a little bit on the stream, but you're seeing these are pretty big numbers, and the sort of gold star that they're saying as a minimum is usually 100 feet. So, and often that's not possible, I understand, but just to know, when I'm pushing people to go wider, that's why. You also might want to think about what your goals are. So we talked about all those functions, but which function you're trying to protect or restore for, you want to think about that, where you're going to put your buffer. So this streamway here, that's, if you are thinking about stream erosion, you really want to give that stream room to move around. And so you could think about a streamway setback where it's sort of this fixed space that the stream can meander through. If you're talking about reduced flooding, headwater streams are really important in that. We want to make sure that that we're catching the water before it even gets into the system. Floodplains are also really important to have something, vegetation there instead of humans and human uses. Wetlands are also really important for holding water. If you're thinking about wildlife, you want to think about the corridors they use, maybe headwaters, maybe mature forests. And then there's other conservation priorities that if those are your priorities, you want to think about those as where you want to protect the riparian buffers. And one more thing about how you target. So this is more about targeting restoration. If you're worried about surface runoff, you really want to you want to plant really high density of streams. Plants that are adapted to sediment buildup. So because that's the thing, you're going to be trying to catch that buildup. If you're really interested in nitrogen removal or other types of subsurface runoff, catching that, you need to plant things that have deep roots that will intercept that water, and high root biomass to do that nitrogen removal. And it's best if you're planting in hydric soils. Phosphorus is a tough one. It definitely, their buffers will help with phosphorus processing within the stream, but if you want to stop the buffer or the phosphorus from getting into the stream, you really need to catch it before you get to the floodplain, because what happens is it sort of gets stuck on those trees, and if the flood comes up, it will just reinvigorate all that phosphorus and put it into the stream. And so you really have to think hard about where you place things for phosphorus. And if you're thinking about stream erosion, again, you want deep roots, plants that'll resprout if they get hit by anything, or torn off a little bit. Okay, so I just sort of talked about some of the different places to think about. And so what are some of the protection and promotion tools that are out there for stream buffers? At a site scale, you can think about grant funding to protect an area that's already high quality, or restoring an area. And I'm going to go into some of the details of these. The other thing that it's not always obvious, but especially in more urban areas, really just making sure that those stormwater requirements for development are being followed, and that stormwater practices are being maintained. That helps to keep the water from getting in. And there are some stormwater practices that include riparian buffers. On a regional or municipal scale, making sure that you have that municipal planning going, watershed planning, open space plans, and then following through and implementing the priority projects. Municipal ordinances are a great way, watercourse protection, buffer laws, overlay zones, critical environmental areas. All of those are great ways to think about municipal protection of riparian buffers. And then some state funding for restoration and protection. There is ag non-point source funding through ag and markets. I'm not going to go into details of that. I'm not the expert, so soil and water probably would be the best avenue to find out more about those. The EFC has the Green Innovation Grant Program, the GIGP. DEC has Water Quality Improvement Project grants, the WQIP. We also have Hudson River Estuary grants, Climate Smart Communities grants, and then I'm going to talk about Trees for Tribs, which isn't technically a grant, but it is resources for restoration. So really quickly, I'm not going to go through the details of this, but GIGP does have funding for establishment and restoration of floodplains, riparian buffers, streams, or wetlands. Here's an example picture from Tioga County of some stream work, and then they replanted the riparian buffer. It's hard to tell. This is right after it was done. WQIP, there is funding for riparian restoration when you group it with stream bank stabilization. So if you want to do one of these bigger projects, so when you combine them, you get higher score. And then there's also source water funding for easements or land acquisition around public surface water sources. So the priority for buffers that are directly on the reservoir, but you can also do the upstream streams. And I don't know the details of that. Anna might be able to give us more details, but that's still part of the WQIP funding. The Hudson River Estuary Program has grants generally every year. And we cover local stewardship planning, so watershed planning, conservation planning for the municipalities. And then some kinds of green infrastructure projects are covered if they're affecting impacted streams. And then tributary restoration grants go for culvert projects and culvert bridge or dam projects. And I just wanted to quickly mention the Climate Smart Communities actions. So as far as riparian buffers are concerned, you can restore floodplains or riparian buffers with vegetation. You can preserve natural areas, including riparian buffers, through zoning or other regulations. You can do a natural resource inventory. You can do a watershed assessment, or you can do conservation of natural habitat. So those are all things that you can get points for, or there's also funding for those through Climate Smart Communities. And I'm not the expert of this, but I just wanted to quickly mention where riparian buffers fall in the stormwater manual. So when you look at Chapter 5, the green infrastructure practices, you can do preservation of natural features, preservation of buffers, and then also conserving a riparian area or creating a riparian buffer that has sheet flow to it as a filter strip. Those are also options under the stormwater manual, and trying to push people to do that green infrastructure before they do some of the other more traditional stormwater work. Okay, so now we're going to go to the program that I run, which is called the Hudson Estuary Trees for Tribs. And put very simply, we provide free trees and shrubs for you to plant along tributary streams of the Hudson Estuary. And that means covering all of Rockland County. And again, sort of the quick version, and I'm going to give some more details. Our staff can provide you with a site assessment. So after we get your application, we can come out, walk the site with you, give you some advice on preparation, like what kind of invasive removal might need to happen, layout for the plants, and what will be needed for maintenance. And then we provide free plants and supplies. I'll go into that a little more detail. And then we can show up on the day of planting, deliver the plants, and give some demonstration. There's me talking at a group of kids about how to plant a tree. And the applicant, which can be either the landowner or a third party, provides site preparation. So that might mean invasive removal. That might mean many numbers of things depending on how the site has been used in the past. But it needs to have soil that's ready for planting. The applicant also will recruit the volunteers or provide the labor for planting. We really encourage you to include volunteers, but it's not mandatory. You can use DPW staff if that's what you have. And the applicant is also in charge of maintenance. And I do want to really stress that maintenance is a huge issue for our sites. And so it really is a commitment of probably 5 years going out to a site at least twice a year, doing that maintenance. And so that's a really important part, and we'll help you with it, but we've got a staff of 2, so we're not, and we've got 400 sites. So we're not able to come out and do the maintenance at all the sites. So just really quickly, eligible projects. And for those who've worked with us in the past, this has changed a little bit. So, well, it hasn't changed that it needs to be along a water body, stream, lake, pond, one of those. It can be on either public or private land. It's pretty much anywhere that's along a water body. It needs to be within the program boundary, which is the map here. And what's new is that we're restricting it. No, we won't accept projects that are less than 20-foot wide or and we'll go up to 300-foot wide. No one has called me out on the 300-foot wide, but so that 20-foot, and again, that goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning. We know that wider buffers make a bigger difference. And so we're really trying to push people to go a little bit wider. So we're not doing 5-foot buffers. That said, if you have a site where there really is a restriction, and I'm thinking specifically about a project we did in Rockland County where there was parking lot and we really couldn't get rid of it, we can try to work around it. So do come to me if you've got projects where it really isn't a possibility to go wider. And this one is a little hard to explain, but it needs to be large enough to take at least 60 plants. And that really is going to change depending on your site. But generally that means it's a minimum of 2,000 square feet if you want to plant a lot of dense shrubs, and probably a minimum of about 6,000 square feet if you're going to do trees. Again, give me a call and let me know if you have a site that seems like it might not make it. And it needs to be plantable. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this, but obviously we can't plant in the middle of asphalt. We can't plant on a very, very steep slope. Things that are not eligible. Really quickly, stormwater ponds, drainage ditches, and other built structures, anything that's separated from that stream or lake by a road. That's the example we have here. Any large scale stream channel realignment, major excavation work, or major native plant removal. And the idea being that we think that money should have already been included in the plan. There should have already been some plan for how you get the vegetation back in. And anything that's already enrolled in some other funded program for riparian buffers. Again, if you have one that you're not sure about, just shoot me a quick email, call me. I'm very happy to kind of go over whether something's eligible or not. And the other thing that's happened in recent years, we've gotten more applications than we can fill. And so when that happens, we do prioritize sites. So we do prioritize streams over lakes and ponds. Larger planting areas, again, because the science shows us we get better results, wider buffers. If there's a volunteer or educational component, just because then we can get education out there. If it's publicly visible, so it doesn't need to be publicly owned, but that someone can see that we've done this work and they can see our sign saying why. If it's a local priority in a plan already. And if it's more likely to succeed, again, that's sort of a little amorphous, but we're talking about if there's a maintenance plan or we know that someone's going to be taking care of it. Okay, so that's sort of the details of it. How do you apply? It's actually a pretty simple application. It's only 2 pages long. We're really asking for some general information about the site and how you're planning to get stuff in the ground. So are you going to bring in volunteers, that kind of thing. A map of the area, so you can sort of see an example here with that red, and a photo of the area. And again, often it's with snow on it if you're applying for spring. The one thing we do need that is often a question, I do need to have a landowner signature before we can begin the process or visit the site. And that's just because we've had people if it's a third party signing it up, we really need to know that the landowner is on board and they're interested. That said, the application is really the beginning of the conversation. So if you tell me you want to plant it 20 feet wide and 100 feet long, and we get to the site and we find that actually it needs to be a little smaller because we have to avoid the power lines or something, that's okay. We can still negotiate what the details are. And we need those applications by March 1st for a spring planting and August 1st for a fall planting. And just really quickly, I like to show the picture of the size of plants. That really tall one is probably not standard. Every once in a while we have those, but the smaller ones are sort of usually what we have. We usually have somewhere around 40 different species to choose from, trees and shrubs. We don't do grasses. They are different every season, so it's definitely going to be different depending on when you're working with us. They are 1 to 3 year old seedlings, again, relatively small. They come in a variety of pots, as you see there. And what we have really depends on what we have. What we're going to give you for a site depends on what we have, and also the conditions on the site. So we're going to, if it's a really wet site, we're going to give you plants that belong in a really wet site. And we'll work with you on that. You're welcome to let us know your preferences. We'll do our best, but we can't always fit all of them. We also provide tree tubes to protect the trees. So these are here mostly for deer protection. I'm sorry, is there a question? Oh, okay. So we'll provide the stakes and the tubes for trees, and also shrubs. We're also putting shrubs in tree tubes now, just because the deer really have become that much of a problem. That said, if you do not want to use tree tubes, you are welcome to come up with a different way to protect from deer, or really prove to us that there aren't deer as a problem in the space. We just don't want to put them out there in a place where they're just going to get eaten. There have been some sites, I think, in some of the more urban areas in Rockland County where we didn't put tubes on and things did fine because the deer browse is so low. And that's what 110 trees and tubes looks like. So you can see it is sort of a strange site before they're big enough to come out of the top of the tubes. And they usually stay on there for anywhere between 2 to 5 years. And so it is kind of a commitment, and it does look like a lot of plastic, but we find that it's really necessary in the spaces that aren't super urban. And this is just where we've been since 2007, since our program started. We've got 390 sites, more than 60,000 plants, more than 28 miles of stream. We've worked with probably 10,000 volunteers, although we only have records of little less than that. And zooming into Rockland County. So this is historically since 2007, all the sites where we have worked. There's 23 different sites, different locations. 8 of those are private. The other ones, I'm happy to, after the fact, if someone wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to give you the information about the non-private sites. I don't like to give out the private sites without asking the landowners if they're okay with that. About 3,000 plants have gone in the ground, 1.7 miles, 4.3 acres, and 600 recorded volunteers working on all those sites. And just one example of a site that was planted in 2021, that's Rockland Lake State Park. And that's the picture of it was taken in 2023. And you can see some of these tubes have some trees coming out of them. So the state park is taking really good care of this site, and that's great. And you can't see the stream, but it's on the other side of the common reed or Phragmites that's growing on the left side of this picture. So just in case you have a project that's a little bit smaller or needs something that we can't provide, there are some other plant sources out there for riparian buffers. One of them is Buffer in a Bag. This is great for small private landowners. You get 1 free bag of 25 trees and shrubs in the mail. And you're sort of in charge of figuring out where to put them. They give you some information. But it's great if you just want to get started, do a little bit. You can do that over and over again at a site as long as you have met the requirements, which I think is just a photo of where they've been planted. All those plants and the plants that come from us come from the Saratoga Tree Nursery, and they actually do sell plants as well. They're pretty low cost, so you can get 100 plants for around $60. So that's an option too. You could go to a local private nursery. I'm happy to share plant lists as far as natives that work in riparian buffers, if you want to go out and get them on your own. And then there's other state and federal grants, and I mentioned some of those. I'm not going to go into details of those right now, but if you're doing, especially if you're doing a bigger project with stream stabilization or something like that, there's a lot of options. And I just wanted to show a site here. This is a site in Dutchess County. And so you've got the before in 2016 and the after in 2022. And then just in case you couldn't find the planting, it's right there. And there is a little stream sort of hiding among the trees there. And here's what it looks like from the side. So I always like to see, because often 2 years in, people are like, it's not growing, all I see is tubes. So the 2016 picture was taken, that was the year it was planted. So that was the summer after the spring planting. And then you can see in 2022 what it looks like. And it was taken in the fall, and that's why they all look different colors. So that's beautiful fall color, not plants that are stressed. But it also makes it a lot easier to see them. And they're really doing really well. And that's all of my main slides. I've got more pictures of sites if people have specific questions, but I think I will, if anyone has any questions, we could go to that now.
Well, Beth, thanks so much. Anybody got any questions for Beth? Hey, Beth, I'll get started here a little bit too. You mentioned property value, which I thought was kind of interesting, because I've talked to some people that live along really polluted streams, and they don't seem to hurt their property value. As a matter of fact, it's almost like, what you come up with this question, it's almost like they've never kind of thought of it, or they just assume it's really bad. Because I don't know how many people last time I saw kids playing in the water was back when I was a kid up in the country. But do you have any data on actually maybe maybe even testing water quality before and after?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the study that I was quoting when I was talking about that, and I can find it for you and send it later, really was talking, I think, more about probably the lack of erosion that's happening. So it's more of the like not losing property, not seeing the stream sides, sloughing off. And so it's more of a visual property value. I don't think that they were talking about water quality. Because I mean, and the thing about water quality that's interesting is, if you don't have a buffer at your particular property, you've mowed your lawn all the way down, but the watershed above you is in great quality, you're going to still have high water quality at your site. And so that is the hard thing about riparian buffers. We're sort of all in it together. But yeah, I think it was more about specifically erosion in those sites, or the lack thereof. But also I think that natural feel, that green and stream coming together. But I'll find that resource and see if they say anything about water quality in it.
Okay, great. Yeah, wondering any complaints or anything regarding like people want to see the water if they live
absolutely.
along it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely a lot of people who want to see the water, and that is that it is an interesting question about what that means for property value. I personally, anecdotally, would say most of the people that I talk to, it's really a bit of a back and forth of not wanting to lose sight of the water. There are ways you can plant such that you kind of open up windows and you don't just have one big mowed lawn. And so we try to work with people on that. And I'm all for access, like to let people access that water so that they can learn to love it. But trying to do that in ways that are not making the erosion worse, or and removing the shade completely. So it's definitely a balance.
It's always a balance, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a question from John in the chat. John, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, or I can just read it?
Yeah, sure. I can kind of read it off. Basically, I understand that the program requires the owner, or I guess the applicant, to maintain the site after it is planted. Does the DC conduct inspections of the project after it's completed? And if so, for what period do you monitor it? Which I guess ties into the question about water quality monitoring.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yes. We do monitor. And for those of you who have worked with us in the past, it was a little bit whack-a-mole. We weren't necessarily getting to all of our sites. We've changed that process, and we are now going to any site that got planted after 2020 got visited at one growth year. So if it's in the spring, we would come the following year. If it was planted in the fall, it's the year after again. We're coming out in the summer, so we try to walk the site with the landowner if at all possible, or whoever's doing the maintenance. And then we do come back. We're coming back again at 5 years. So at 1 year and 5 years, unless there's something that comes up, in which case we'll come back more often. It is, other than those 2 visits, it's probably a little bit about the squeaky wheel getting the grease if you want us to come out. But yeah, and I try to really let people know that, I mean, it's partly about trying to help you to do that maintenance better, but we're not trying to catch anybody in making mistakes. We're trying to learn as well. Like, we're trying to get out to those sites and see, what worked and what didn't work, and why. And honestly, because we cover 13 different counties, it's really, the processes that work in Rockland County in the very urban area are very different from what happens in Rensselaer County and the very rural areas. And so we have to learn different techniques. And so we're always learning more.
Right. I guess like a tie-in question to that too is like, do you have any particular criteria that you measure? Like, I know you said like you're still learning, so you're probably still developing your rubric, but
Yeah.
is there any like kind of criteria that like you typically look for based on the site?
It's a great question. And we struggle with this all the time. Anna can tell you, she's on this call too. But so mainly we're looking at survival rates and survival densities. So survival rates of the plants we planted and any natural regeneration in that site. So, and also the invasives that are there. We don't do water quality sampling. And that's mainly because of what I was talking about before. The water quality at that site is very much confounded by what happens upstream. And so even if we did everything right and the buffer is really healthy, we might see the water quality getting worse. And that's something that we can't control for. We did work with Cornell to try to do some water quality samplings, and we really weren't able to like weed out the data to figure out so we're really trusting in the literature that says that riparian buffers are helpful with water quality if you do them right. So we're really looking for those survival rates. We're looking for structural things like erosion and canopy cover. And I'm happy to share that we have a very long protocol about how we take the data and what data we take.
Good, that'd be excellent. Thank you.
Beth, it'd be interesting too, you said a plant list that you've got. That would be interesting, that maybe we could get that, Brianna, and put that on our website or post it somewhere or send it out somewhere. Because I think people, you know what, now that I'm along those lines, what's your definition of a native?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it is changing as we think about climate change, for sure. And some of it, the definition is really based on what is logistically possible for us. We're basically focused on things that are seen as native in the Hudson Valley. That said, we used to plant tamarack, which is something that is native to Albany, but not native to Rockland County. And so I'll still plant it in Albany, but it's very cold. It's more of a cold species, a colder weather species. And so, but we're also looking now, there's some species that are south of Rockland County that we're really thinking about adding to our list because of climate change. So we're really looking for natives that have enough. So native as in historically the seed was found in the Hudson Valley, and that I'm kind of relying on the Flora Atlas, the New York State Flora Atlas, and that's usually what I use. And also we tend to avoid cultivars that are hybridized. as much as possible. We do have one cultivar that we plant because it stays really low, but it's not been hybridized. It's a cultivar that was a selection. So for the plant nerds out there, we're trying to avoid the cultivars because we want to really make sure there's a lot of genetic variety. And most of the plants we're putting out there come from seed, which Saratoga Nursery is able to provide. And that really makes sure we have lots of genetic variety, as opposed to like grafting the same species over and over and over again. Then you end up with, not enough variety and not the ability to respond to pests and changing temperature conditions, climate conditions.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic right there. You could
And you
have a
could
whole-
definitely, people do get, if you want something that's really hyper local, then you got to look for seed locally and grow up your own plants. And we're just not able to do that logistically, but highly recommended if you have the capacity.
Well, we'll count on our Blue Jays to keep spreading the oak trees. So preparation of the area. Kind of interested in what's your take on herbicides?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to officially recommend or not recommend them. I think it really depends. It depends on your goal, like what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're trying to do erosion control and you have a lot of multiflora rows, I'm going to say you might want to keep it because that's really good for erosion control, but not weed, not so much. And so it really depends on what you're trying to get done. I'm not opposed to herbicides as long as they're being used in the correct way. So really carefully thinking about what's going to make a difference to getting the plants in the ground. I'm not able to make specific recommendations for herbicides. You'd have to go to someone else for that. I haven't been trained. I'm not certified, but I'm not opposed to it. And I've definitely seen it used in a very calculated way to do the right thing. You do need to make sure that you're using herbicides that are specifically designed for aquatic environments. So that if they get into the water, they will become inert. And that exists out there. So most of the stuff that I'm much more knowledgeable about manual control of invasives, just because the vast majority of the people we work with, that's what they prefer to try.
Okay, well, that's interesting. That must be kind of interesting that way too, in the sense of, because I know, for example, mugwort, I mean, you pull one and you make two, it seems. So yeah, so how would you manually handle mugwort?
Yeah, we actually have had some success with mugwort by shading it out. And what that means is that you're weed whacking or mowing around the plants for the first maybe 4 or 5 years. And we've had some sites, not in Rockland County, but farther up in Dutchess and Ulster, where they're mowing 3 times a year or 3 times in the growing season around the plants, and it's working. And we're getting shade, and the mugwort is starting to die off because of the shade and also the pressure of constant mowing. So it's not a short-term project, but we are seeing some success in that way. And the tubes are actually helpful for that. If you're going to be weed whacking or mowing a lot, the tubes help protect, when you're doing that work.
Yeah, mowing is a great tool to keep all sorts of critters at bay, all sorts of bad guys.
We'd love to have these sites not be mowed in the very long term, but in the short term for establishment, mowing is necessary in a lot of sites. Not everywhere, but a lot of sites.
Okay, and so I have 2 last questions. I know you had mentioned, how bad are the deer? You mentioned, I mean, you've got the tubes, so.
Yeah, and every time I go to a talk about deer, it's like overwhelming. Yeah, the carrying capacity is very, very overwhelmed for deer because of all the sort of suburban landscapes where they can just eat. It's sort of a buffet for them. And so we have found, unless you're in a place that's very urbanized and there's too many streets and too many buildings for them to get into, pretty much everywhere, I mean, we saw a deer run into downtown Kingston and downtown Poughkeepsie. They are around, and when they get into a site, they will just eat everything. So any place that's not super urban, I would say we probably need it. Unless you've got something else going on. So people have put in deer fences, people have put in different kinds of deterrents, and they can work, but like scented deterrents, they do work, but you have to reapply them over and over and over again. And so I don't like to give out plants without some kind of protection. That said, we're really learning that the tubes aren't great for shrubs. And so what would be better is some like fence rings. So you can make them, but I haven't been able to figure out how to afford them. They're really expensive. And so I can give recommendations about how other people can do it, but I haven't been able to provide them on a large scale.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, there's lots of great information about deer. I recommend the Cornell Forest Connect has some really interesting research projects related to deer in their webinar series.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. And then you also mentioned no grass. How come you don't use grasses?
Well, and I think that's just logistically and financially, I'm not able to. Grasses are a great option. We for the most part, I recommend having some kind of woody structure somewhere in the buffer. But grasses are great too. It becomes like prohibitively expensive for us. And so again, if somebody wants to do a bigger project and they have funding from other sources, we can bring in the woody plants and they can bring in the wildflowers and the grasses and that kind of thing. I'm working on a big project in Ulster County that's a pollinator project, and we're bringing in the woody species, but they're bringing in, there's other resources, other funding sources are bringing in a lot of the grasses and the flowers that are also important pollinator species. And that's been kind of a fun collaboration.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Okay, so my last question. These things take time. Seems like nature takes time, and seems like human beings do not want to wait. So how do you handle that with somebody that may want an instant result?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great, if someone knows the answer, please tell me. And I'm learning, this is definitely a learning curve for me too. Like when I started 12 years ago, I wasn't really pushing as hard on the maintenance. Now, when I go do the site assessment, I talk to people, I try to be really real about what it's going to be. And say to people, we're not going to give you plants unless you have a plan. So that's one thing. We try to weed out people who if you really want instant gratification, I say go to the nursery and get 5-year-old, 7-year-old species that you put them in the ground and they're going to be, they're not going to need as much maintenance. But no, I mean, it's just trying to really just letting people know over and over again that this is a process and it requires a lot of work. But it's a challenge, and it's kind of constantly, it's always going to be a challenge. Yeah, I mean, I really wish that I could have more staff. There's a sort of sister program that's working in the Upper Susquehanna Coalition, and they actually hire people over the summer to go out and do the maintenance at the sites. And that might be the way we're going. We're really looking at our survival rates these days and trying to make them, trying to really improve how many sites are doing better. So I'm pushing people harder to do maintenance, and also maybe thinking about other ways to do that. But I really think you need a dedicated person to be paying attention to the site for 5 years at minimum. And some sites is more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. John, do you want to chime in, or would you want, or I know you've got a question? Well, I'll ask this for John. Can the owner plant their own flora alongside the DEC selection?
Yeah, yes. And we can make recommendations for what they would want to plant. It's yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm going to discourage anything that's invasive, but but certainly anything that's either native or non-invasive, I'm really okay with the landowner like supplementing and adding to the planting, and we can work around all of that. And we've even, like, I don't want to say this is what we want to do all the time, but if you're able to, you have another source of plants and you need help with the protection, as long as it's helping to restore a riparian buffer and you fill out the application, we can work with you.
That kind of brought up another idea in my mind here too. How hard is it to find natives? If the person goes to Lowe's or goes to a nursery, are they more apt to have the cultivars, or do you really have to know a little bit about what you're doing to actually get a true native?
Yeah, unfortunately, you really have to know. And it's not easy. And I wish I had an answer to that. The nice thing is there's a lot more demand these days. And so I think that we're going to see the industry responding, and there's going to, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, there's going to be a lot more knowledge out there and a lot more information. But yeah, you really have to ask the question. So yes, in a place like Lowe's, you might find something that is a native species, but you got to ask where it came from. Did it come from Minnesota? Is it really going to be prepared for the kinds of winters and summers we have here? But that said, it's really hard to find the right stuff, especially with limited money. And we have to work pretty hard when we're trying to find extra species that don't come from the Saratoga nursery. Westchester Native Plant Center is a great place to learn and buy plants. But I'm not sure in Rockland County, like, what the resources are. I'm sure the master gardeners would be able to maybe help come up with places where there are native plants. I cover too big an area to be able to know all of them locally, but yeah, really asking the question. If someone can't tell you the source of their seed or their plant, then it's probably a cultivar, or it's probably from someplace that's not, native to New York. That said, if it's not, again, going back to the, like, what are your goals and all that kind of stuff, like, if you're really trying to stop erosion, do the best you can and get something that's not invasive, it's still better than nothing, I would say, or work with us. But yeah, sourcing is hard. But there are some sources out there. You just got to work hard to, you got to work a little bit to find them. And I'm not allowed to recommend anybody that's a private nursery. But if I know of something, I will share it. So but specifically in Rockland County, I off the top of my head, I don't know of any, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. So.
Yeah, it does seem to be growing. So this native plant movement certainly does seem to be growing. I found it a lot easier to find native plants and native seed. 20 years ago, you couldn't find anything. There was zero out there.
Yeah.
So it is getting much, much better. Well, gee, I want to thank you very much for doing this. Does anybody else? I don't want to stop anybody if anybody else has any questions. I think did we lose Jim Dean? Because he might chime in on a branch across the stream with the stormwater.
Yeah, he had to leave a little bit early.
Yeah, he's with the drainage agency, so he may have something to say about a log in the stream. But in any event, I don't know how.
I said if it's not
Well,
going to threaten infrastructure.
Yeah. Well, I think second to sedimentation is flooding. And I think when or I should say water quality, they kind of go hand in hand. But I think if you talk to the public of what's the major issues, flooding is number one. And sometimes we miss that. And listen, I'm sure your stream buffering slows the water down and certainly prevents and helps the flooding, let alone the erosion that goes along with it too. So
Sure.
It's a win-win as it comes to that.
Yeah, and often I'm called to sites where people are really worried about the flooding on site, and they think that they can plant a buffer to fix the flooding on site. And I'm not saying that it's not, it might help a little bit with soaking up some water, but honestly, when you're thinking about flooding, you really need to be thinking in a watershed way about where that water is coming from. And so And that's often, you know, some of the regional agencies can think in a watershed way about like, okay, so we have flooding here. That means we need to look at the tributaries coming down into that, and where can we store more water? And so maybe that's a riparian buffer. Maybe it's a stormwater practice, or many, I should say, many stormwater practices. And so it's really hard to think about flooding at the location where the flooding is, unless it's being caused by a specific bridge or culvert or something like that. But if it's just too much water getting to a space, you have to really look upstream. But there are some good flood studies in Rockland County, and I say go back to those flood studies and definitely take a look at those and think about where the pinch points are and go upstream.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Well, great. Thank you again. This has been very informative, very interesting. It's one of the benefits of having Zoom is that these are recorded, so people can come back and take a look. So this would be great, and if we could get the little bit of information with the plant lists, and what was the other one?
You had
There
asked
was-
for about property value.
Okay,
And what maintenance, or sorry, monitoring protocol. So I can share those with the group. Yeah, I'm happy to.
Great.
And I just put a link to the program website, which and I can also put in my contact information. So if there's something that comes up afterwards, feel free, please contact me. It's yeah, I've got lots of information and I know of lots of resources. So
great. Yeah, I was particularly interested in slide number 6. I might, Rihanna, we'll get this on the website. I was very interested in slide 6. I may actually borrow that and at one of the talks that I've got coming up.
sure.
So
Okay, yeah, I can send you the resource that came from, so you have it, and then you've got the background as well.
okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. All right. So Brianna, if you can put up our agenda.